Welcome to our second annual Good News Give Back event. Good News Give Back is close to the DNA of the olive branch and is a movement of generosity. We are transformed by God's love, and we want to be a community that loves others, that loves to give, and loves to serve. Good News Give Back is starting today, so get ready to be inspired as we celebrate what God has done and what He is doing, and to be challenged by God about how we can impact our community.
I believe that the blood of Jesus washes white as snow. I believe that the power of the gospel makes the broken whole. I believe that the curse of sin was broken when they rolled away that stone. I believe, I believe, I believe. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. I believe that the walls will start falling when we fall down on our knees. I believe that the lame will go walking in the blind are gonna see. I believe that the gates of hell will tremble when the church begins to sing. I believe, I believe, I believe. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, and no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nations. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the daughters, sing it to the sons, to every generation. Look at what the Lord has done. Sing it to the darkness, that the light has come. Sing it to the nation. Look at what the Lord has done. Oh, look at what the Lord has done. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. As I bow before you, Lord, I will rise in confidence. I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in. And no matter where I go, no matter where I've been, I will see your goodness, Lord, in the land I'm living in.
Fight for Freedom is a local Christian organization that fights sex trafficking here in Markham, the GTA, and throughout Canada. My colleague Jessica will now share a testimony of a survivor who was impacted by Fight for Freedom.
Hi, my name is Jessica Ortiz and I work with Fight for Freedom, and I'm about to share a survivor's testimony with you. A couple years ago, I found myself at rock bottom after working 23 years in the sex industry and having suffered from countless years of abuse, abandonment issues, abortions, addiction of every kind, anger issues, anxiety, assault, being bullied, cutting, depression, eating disorders, financial devastation, DUIs, homelessness, hospitalizations, gastrointestinal complications, instability, jail, mental health issues, miscarriages, overdosing, PTSD, rape, robbery, stalking, multiple suicidal attempts, and trauma, amongst many other struggles. I had lost all hope and faith as I found myself crying in my hospital bed after having crashed my car, being arrested and facing jail time, being wrongfully terminated by my employer, losing my cat, who was like my baby, to cancer, and years of being trapped in a trauma bond and abuse by the hands of a narcissistic boyfriend, and now facing homelessness. I was crying out to God to take my life. I had nothing left to live for, but in a moment's notice, God Himself made His presence very clear to me. The dark cloud or bubble that surrounded me for as long as I could remember suddenly dissipated. I looked up and said, "You have my full attention. I'm all yours." For I knew I was in the presence of a supernatural phenomenon, and this was a divine intervention. The words spoken next were ever so clear to me. I have plans for you. All that you have ever been through is not for nothing. They are a part of my plan. Do not fear, child, for I am with you. It was surreal, but it was the clearest in my mind, body, and soul I've ever been. I made a commitment in that moment that I would keep pushing onward and upward, for the Lord Himself had just spoken to me, and it was in the presence of the Holy Spirit that wrapped me with a blanket of comfort, love, and peace. My life began to unravel following that day. I became extremely sick, faced with immeasurable stress, trials, and tribulations. I had lost everything that had ever been of value to me. I had lost all of my confidence, my self-esteem, personal possessions, desire to associate with anyone, or any trust in others. I basically went into a shell. I was in survival mode. Fortunately, I connected with a lady that I had met in the club a couple of years back, a Fight for Freedom outreach volunteer, and asked if I could attend church with her. She happily agreed to pick me up and bring me to her church. It was there that I was introduced to a lovely lady, and she informed me that she knows someone who might be able to help me. This lovely lady I had just met was the Director of Education with Fight for Freedom, and the someone she referred me to was a case manager with Fight for Freedom. Thanks to generous donations, I was supplied with grocery cards, bus passes to get me to and from hospital appointments, therapy, and Bible study. I was provided coverage for dental care, which I desperately needed. I was provided help to pay my cell phone bill. I received supplements for my ailing stomach issues and health complications. I received clothing, blankets, socks, lip balm, toiletries, etc., cards of encouragement, prayer, weekly therapy sessions through the counseling department, as well as DBT workshops. An endless supply of encouragement and support kept flowing in. Thanks to Fight for Freedom's partnership with Ripple of Kindness, I was offered employment with the organization, and that helped me get back on my feet when I was just crawling to survive. I am proud to say that I have held the position of Survivor Care Advisor for at least a year. And I've regained my self-confidence and self-esteem. I've developed new friendships and an immeasurable amount of support. I'm now thriving as opposed to just surviving, and it's all thanks to generous supporters like you. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your love and support. Thank you.
It's because someone showed this woman love and kindness that she was able to take steps away from her past and toward God. Thank you for your continued prayers and giving, which make it possible for us to help women in situations like these.
In case you had any questions about what we're going to be talking about today, we are in the middle. We're actually starting a campaign today called Good News, Give Back. And the core of the whole thing is that we have been intended by God to be good news wherever we go. And the only way we can do that is if we are willing to give back, if we're willing to love, if we're willing to serve and willing to give. So we're going to be talking about that. But today I want to talk about the fact that love drives everything. You read through the New Testament in particular, and that is the one thing that you will see: love drives everything. So I was thinking about our world system and thinking about just some of the mess that we're in and things that we're seeing and so on. And I Googled the question, what does the world need more of? And I got this response. And the 15 top answers were: love needs more action, the world needs more unity, tolerance, acceptance, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, trust, hope, community, wisdom, contentment, hugs, and you. Needs more of you. Now, it's interesting, isn't it, that there's no mention here of technology, no mentioning of iPhones or money or success, anything like that, and it really focuses in on how we treat people. Now, I was kind of expecting, to kind of find some version of, some of the songs we've heard. What the world needs now is more love, sweet love, or, all you need is love, da-da-da-da-da. You're probably familiar with that song. And I thought, well, it ought to be in there someplace, but maybe it's because love has lost some of its punch. We think in terms of, love. People love their pizza, and they love their cars, and they love, some love cats, which is just sad. People can be really fickle when it comes to love, because love for many people, it seems to be this feeling, well, I'm in love, and now I'm out of love, and I've lost my love, and so on. So it actually tends to mean for many people, I have this really nice, warm, fuzzy feeling inside about whatever it is or whoever it happens to be. Now, I have no idea who posted that list, what the world needs more of and so on, but it actually is quite close to what Jesus said about love and how love got defined by his apprentices, mostly through the New Testament. Now, we're going to read it together. Jesus actually had something to say about how love actually gets worked out and worked through our lives, and he actually said it in probably, I'm believing, his last parable before he actually died, and this is what he wrote. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit upon his glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered into his presence, and he will separate people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now, let's be really clear. This is one of the reasons why Jesus got killed. People would be thinking, who does he think he is, that he's going to be judging the earth? Well, that's who he was. It says he will place the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. And so, okay, who are the sheep? Who are the goats? Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world." I think, well, I would like that. That's what I want to hear on the other side there. And he says this, how? How does he discern between the two? "For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And then the righteous ones will reply, "Lord, what? We don't remember that. When did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" And the king will say, "I tell you the truth, whenever you did it to the least of these my brothers and sisters, you were doing it to me." Wow. Jesus came in disguise. And how we treated him is really clear in this whole passage here. Now, just a couple of things I want you to notice about this. First of all, this was Jesus' very last parable, at least that I'm aware of, okay? And this was like given just days before he died. So you think, okay, if somebody is like giving these as kind of last words, well, they'd be pretty important, I would think, okay? So what he's telling us here, I don't know if you've ever been to, university or whatever, and it is really cool if the professor tells you, okay, this is going to be on the final exam. And that's what Jesus is saying here. It's the final exam. And what happens in this final discernment thing, this final separation thing, is that it's basically he's separating the authentic from the posers. Now that's good if you're authentic, not good if you're a poser, right? And it emphasizes the fact that love is not a feeling that you feel. I felt love. I felt concern for you. I cried a tear when I walked by you and saw you in such bad shape. And I thought to myself, wow, that's so sad. No, it's what you actually do. Now, here's the deal. For love to actually work, somebody has to give and somebody has to receive, okay? Now, when we're newborn and helpless and we can't give back in any way, all we can do is produce dirty diapers and so on and all the other stuff that comes with childhood. Love comes to us in the form of food, and it comes to us in the form of warmth and comforting, and being changed and being held, Even when our parents want to sleep, they get up and they help us. Now, how many of you parents, when you had your kids and they were newborns and so on, and you had to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and change the diaper, how many of you jumped out of bed and you did that with a smile on your face and a song in your heart, and you said, I am so glad to serve this little baby? Well, you may have done that for the first few times, but I'm telling you, once that dragged on for about 4 months, you probably didn't do it. And you did it for the first reason because it's illegal not to do it, okay? And more importantly, you know how important this is in a child's life to be cared for when they're so vulnerable. And there's a foundation inside that every person has that needs to be built into them, and we do this as parents, What we say by our actions, by the things that we tell them, you have infinite worth. I love you, and I will always love you, even if you don't love me in return. You are valuable. You are worthwhile. You are, fascinating. Now, are we kind of on common ground here? Okay, I hope we are, because you can't respond at this point. But love doesn't just pop out of nowhere. Where we're going along and we have a child and all of a sudden, or we see somebody in need and it kind of comes into our life from nowhere. The only way that our world is going to get more love, as it's described in this passage of, in these things of what the world needs more of, it's in people. It comes from you and it comes from me. And we have to show love and we have to get better at loving, which is sometimes difficult. See, what happens is our personal love tank is actually too small to actually fill the needs that we have to fill. But God's love tank is massive. And so he fills us up. He fills up our hearts. And he loved us because, we love because he first loved us, and he fills up our lives. So let's start there, okay? You were made to be loved. You were. If you don't feel loved, it's this gnawing, awful feeling inside because you were made to be loved. And the corollary is true, you were also made to love. Now, this includes romance. This includes, the people that you're attracted to, but it's way, way, way bigger than that. And that's just important to understand. God's plan is for everyone to grow in this area of love. It's foundational to life. Let me put it like this. If you could turn around, at the end of your life, right before you fall into the grave, and look behind you, what you would want to see is you would want to see places that were made better because you loved. You'd want to see people, a trail of people who were made better because you loved them, because you kind of sprinkled or splashed love on them as you went through life. And when Jesus' Spirit comes to live within us, which he does when we choose to follow him, then that is the source of love for making that happen. Now, here's what I want to kind of get at a little bit. In our hearts, there's a divider, okay? So when you're a baby, that divider is pretty much not there. I mean, you can receive love, and you're kind of in the mode of you're laying there crying, and hungry and so on. It's like, pour it on. You're almost pure receiver. Now, when you get a little ways down the line, okay, you give back, and sometimes you give back just by smiling or cooing or making noises or doing the things that make your parents glad that they had you and that they went through the times when you couldn't give back. And as you're a child, this receive part of you is intended to push on the give part and push out into other people's lives. You give, but the typical thing is you give, I get, and so on, and that's kind of the way it is with kids. Most of you know that. The mature part of you means that the love that you receive from God and from other people is intended to push in your life, in your heart, and then pour out into the lives of other people. That's the way it's intended to work. Now, early in my life, my parents taught me, Jesus wants to live at the core of your life, and he will help you to do what you can't otherwise do. So when you're a kid, you think, wow, that's great, Jesus, so help me fly. I've always wanted to fly. Well, that's not going to actually happen, is it, We had some friends of ours who had a child who was scared to death of the dark, So his mom asked him to go out and sweep the leaves off the porch one night, and he started to cry. He says, I can't go out there. I'm just too scared to do that. So his mom sat down with him and said, well, Jesus is with you wherever you go. You don't have to be scared, and told him about this and so on. And then she says, now go out and sweep the leaves off the porch. So he sticks his head out the door and he says, hey, Jesus, hand me the broom. Well, it didn't quite work, as you know. That's kind of the way it happens and so on. Now, the truth about life is the Spirit of Jesus, when he comes to live in your life, he may not do with you, it's not the genie, of the lamp where he gives you 3 magic wishes. He's not going to make you the next billionaire necessarily. He's not going to, take bring the person that you wish that you could marry and plop them in your front door. Probably not going to give you A's in all your courses. You have to study for those. But however, he is more than willing to love other people through you and to make your home and your office and your neighborhood and even where you get your coffee a more loving place because he's working through you. He's working through your hands. He's working through your eyes. He's working through your voice. The Spirit of God has been the force behind love in this world for 2,000 years. Now, whenever you see unity and action and acceptance and kindness and compassion and forgiveness and generosity, what you realize is that the Spirit of God is usually at work somewhere in that mix because it doesn't usually come natural to us. And I can guarantee you that that's what he wants to do through your life in the lives of other people. See, love will always, always, always push you to give back. The way love works is love receives, and in its crudest form, it just takes, but it also gives back. And that's what you learn. That's the learning part of love, is learning to give back, learning to help, learning to serve other people. And that's what growing up emotionally and spiritually is all about. That's what it means to become mature. Jesus was a lover and a giver. And it's always intended that the followers of Jesus will become like him and do the things that he did. Bob Goff has written a book called Love Does. And what you find when you begin to read the book is that he's a fascinating guy. He spent 16 days on the Pacific with 5 of his friends and a case of canned meat, which I'm sure was an interesting experience. He took his kids on a world tour to have ice cream with the heads of state in a number of different nations that he's a part of. He's a lawyer by practice, but he didn't actually get into law school until he sat for 7 days outside the dean's office until they actually gave him a chance to go to law school. He pursued his wife for 3 straight years before she agreed to even date him. So just an incredible, incredible guy. But he says love does. Love takes sacrifice. Love is not about, saying hi to your neighbor. Love is actually doing something and engaging in their lives. And Love Does is the name of the nonprofit organization that he started, and it's at work in a number of different nations. I think about 8 different nations. And he actually helps people who are struggling finding just the basic human rights. And he works in their behalf and lobbies in their behalf. Why? Well, because love does. Let me put it like this. People don't just care anymore, but love does. We think, well, people are afraid to touch people and get, engaged in people's lives. Love does. People would rather protect their stuff than lend it out. Well, love does. People's schedules are way too jammed and their time is way too precious for them to just stop and help. But love does. People are suffering from compassion fatigue, and they're too burnt out to listen to people's problems and pray for them. Love does. People don't have money just kind of sitting around in bank accounts to help people in need or help somebody get to safety. Love does. There's just too much disease floating around in our world, and that's been proven by, COVID and everything like that, for people to get close and give you a hug, and to remind you that you're still human. But love does. See, we're all tempted, to keep our time and our money and ourselves from the critters and from the cooties, especially after these past 3 years, Potentially infected people, could get into our space and kill us off or seriously wound us. And the question people who say that they follow Jesus have to ask is, what would Jesus do? What would love have me do? Think about it this way. Would Jesus want me just to wait to love and save and help until everything's safe and until there are no more risks out there and I could just go and do it, without any problems myself? It's just never going to happen. There's never going to be a sterile environment, that is just going to bring on all the stuff that you need to love. And that's why love does. Love steps into risky places. Let me ask you, if you're a parent, do you do that with your kids? Let the baby lay in their crib and scream, and cry and so on, because you can't just get up and care for them in the middle of the night with a smile on your face and a song in your heart. No, you do it. Love does. That's what love does. Love goes beyond, what we think we ought to do. John, who was a guy at Jesus' inner circle, and part of his apprentices and disciples, he lived to be 90 years old, which means that he lived probably for almost 30 years more than the other guys who were part of Jesus' team. And this is what he wrote. He says, "Dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. But anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love. God showed how much he loved us by sending his one and only Son into the world so that we might have eternal life through him." So we could just put it up like this, right? God is love. And apparently, from what we see and hear all about Jesus' life, is he offers us his love. But for love to actually work well, it takes a giver and a receiver. And if we are not into receiving, then the chances are that we will miss what God wants to do in our lives. Now, think about this for just a minute, okay? John had a whole, description all through the scriptures, the Holy Scriptures, about who God is. But he chooses the word love. He could have chosen God is power, and he is, God is all present, like he's everywhere out to the farthest star, and he is. God knows everything, and he does. But he chose love. Because love is the driving characteristic of who God is, infinite love. And then the side note, he says, if you say that you're, one of God's fans and you love him and you're part of his gang and everything like this, but you don't love, he said, you're a poser. Because people who have God living in them and who love God, they love other people because that's what he's asked us to do. And if we still don't get it, Jesus says, that love summarizes the final exam on life. He says, you want to please God? He says there are two hooks that everything that the Bible says hangs on. One of them is love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. And then he says, and there's another one. And this says whether or not you love God. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that becomes clearer and clearer. Jesus says this because God is love. And when he's working in the heart and the life of somebody, that's what comes out of it. We love others, neighbors as ourselves. And Jesus gave us the story about this. Remember the Samaritan? Somebody who was despised by, the Jewish people and so on. And he stumbles onto this person who'd been mugged. And he's laying there bleeding, almost dead, naked because they stole his clothes. And he didn't say, wow, it really sucks to be you. He actually got off his donkey. He actually bandaged the guy up, poured wine into his wounds to purify them and oiled them. And then he put him on his donkey and he walked, took the guy to an inn, stayed there overnight with the guy, and then the next morning before he left, paid the innkeeper to keep the guy there and said, if any more expenses come up, charge me for it. Now, if you don't like the thought of actually having to do that, well, blame Jesus. He's the one that said it. He's the one that taught it. And Jesus later narrowed it down even further. In his last meal with his apprentices, Jesus told them this. He said, there's a new command. And so maybe they're thinking, wow, this is going to be some new cool truth, that we can, use in our next message or impress our friends with and so on. They get their pencils and their paper out. Well, of course, they didn't have them back then. And then Jesus said, okay, here's the new commandment. He says, so now I'm giving you a new commandment. Love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. And I'm guessing that their response may have been, I don't know, I wasn't sitting there, may have been, but wait a minute, Jesus, you mean you want us to love them? Them? You want me to love a guy who, basically beat me up so that he could get the taxes out of me, You want me to love a tax collector, a traitor? You mean I'm supposed to love a terrorist, this guy who thinks that the only good Roman is a dead Roman? You expect me to love these fishermen, who speak with this weird accent, and hands stink like fish? You want me to love them? And Jesus would say, yes, because how you love one another is going to say whether or not you belong to me. And to learn how to love, you have to learn how to accept and how to forgive and how to be kind and how to follow Jesus in this way. You see, even when you want to say something mean, even when you don't want to be generous, because you're not sure that you have enough, you serve and you give, because that's how love expresses itself in the lives of other people. And Jesus would say, by the way, your feet are still wet because I washed them. That's what he did. He washed his disciples' feet. Now let's talk about the one another part of this. Now, do you mind if I push on you and maybe, offend you just a little bit here? I don't intend to do that. But the church, in other words, the gathered people of Jesus, is intended to be a place where you learn how to love people, where you learn how to give and you learn how to serve. It's not intended to be kind of this place where you just kind of walk in with, 260 pounds of need, you just sit there, and then everybody just comes and loves on you and pours it on and accepts you in all your mistakes, No, it's about learning to love other people, even if you don't like their pets, even if, they don't, vote the same way that you do, even if they don't look or smell or work like you do. It's learning to love people who are different than yourself. And they sometimes might even diss the country you're from, make fun of your accent, Nathaniel's comment about Jesus, remember that, when he heard that Jesus had come from Nazareth, he kind of went, Nazareth, he says, does anything good come out of Nazareth? Sometimes people do that. Church was not intended to just supply us with an unending supply of love and caressing and prayers and everything like that. It's intended to be a place where you learn to love. Do you receive love? Of course you do. But you learn how to love. It's a graduate education in love. The church, Jesus' congregation, is a classroom. It's a classroom. And it matures us. It grows us up. And our temptation, when we encounter people who don't agree with us and they won't carry, they won't carry their, the banner in our parade, is just basically say, hey, I'm out of here, There's got to be a better church out there than this one, And we just, keep on going on sometimes looking for the best church, as opposed to making it a better church, as opposed to engaging and learning how to love and learning what God is trying to teach us. Same thing with marriage, Sometimes people get married and they think, well, this is great. I have somebody to cook my food, somebody to, help me out, fix my car, do all this stuff. And they look at it as, this is where I'm going to get all these good things. Actually, marriage it's an amazing thing, but I'm telling you, it's one of the most painful, educational, growing up experiences that you ever have, because you have to think about somebody besides yourself, especially if you have kids. All real relationships in our world are a crash course in learning how to grow up, how to be the person that we're supposed to be. And I'll tell you what one of the biggest enemies of this is. It's pride. See, if your biggest need in life is to be right, like you got to be right in your family, you got to be right with your kids, you got to be right, and find fans who all believe that you're the most right person in the world, then love and humility and kindness and gentleness will always be hard. And you can say, yeah, but I'm right, And what happens is it becomes this barrier in our lives that keeps us away from what we're supposed to experience. And the barrier is me. It's, between me and others. The barrier is always selfishness, And we try to, people try to break through that, or we try to break through that, and it kind of breaks off in half at the bottom. And then the whole thing about needing to be right, that's just deadly, You say, but I'm right. Well, pride versus love will kill off love. Let me explain how I know that. It's from Paul, who was one of the gnarliest, meanest, most hateful people in Israel in 30 AD. He was very religious, okay? But the pride had made him a hateful person. And his whole thing was, but I'm right. And so he tortured people, but I'm right. Put people in jail, but I'm right. Killed people, but I'm right. And it became the weapon that he used, to arrest and create all this havoc and hurt a lot of really good people. Now, I've talked about this before, but let me just kind of do a review here. Paul then lays out a definition of what's right. In other words, Jesus didn't just call Paul to, follow him and learn how to love. He then was supposed to teach other people how to love. So he's dealing with this church in Corinth. And Corinth has all these talented people. I mean, these people are amazing. Like, they've got it all, okay? And then every week when they gathered for worship, they kind of had this Corinth's Got Talent show and so on. And so they would come in and they would put on a big display of what they were doing, And for them, the gift was tongues and so on. And they're thinking, well, this is the only gift that builds us up, So I'm building myself. Well, that's not the point. That's not what Paul's saying. He says, you're puffing yourself up. You're becoming proud. And he says to them, you've lost the plot. You've totally lost the plot. See, this is the algorithm that Paul talked to them about. And this seems very strange to us, okay, because sometimes we don't get it. But Paul says basically, you can have all the gifts, but if you don't have love, zip, you're just noise. He says you can be amazing, like you can move mountains and you can, heal people, you can do all kinds of things like that. But if you don't have love, zero, zip. He said you can even make sacrifices, and give your life away. But if it's not about love, if it's about you, then it's nothing. That's a totally new algorithm, isn't it? And then he gives them the definition. And this is astounding. And it's really interesting. Well, let me just read the definition. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. You get that, right? But I'm right. Doesn't demand its own way. It's not irritable. It keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about injustice, but it rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. Love never loses faith. It's always hopeful and endures through every circumstance. And what you realize as you read that definition, this is a profound definition. You maybe had it read at your wedding. But it's not based on feelings. It's based on how you act. Love is action. In other words, love does. Love does. And people, our neighbors, the people around us, will only know that they're being loved by how we treat them and by whether or not we're willing to listen, whether or not we're willing to give of our lives, give of our time, and give of our resources. And it's also seen in the things that we don't do, like boasting and being arrogant and being rude and proud. When people are loved, they feel valued. They don't feel like they're, interrupting you when they ask you for help. When you love somebody, you don't give them an earful. You don't dump your anger out on them and so on. When you have to be the smartest person in the room, and have all the right answers, people don't feel loved or valued because what you're saying is, I'm more important than you. I know more than you. I'm better than you. And when you truly forgive, and you don't carry around a list of, the wrongs that somebody's done, when they could dump it out on you, because they've, like we tend to keep this stuff right at hand so that we can embarrass them or humiliate them or prove how, wronged we've been in our lives. They don't do that. Love acts differently than that. It believes the best. Love doesn't believe gossip. And if you want to just summarize it, love means that you're not always thinking of yourself. You're not always thinking about your stuff. It's not always thinking about having the advantage or preserving your pride. Love in its simplest form, is being free. It's having the space to think about others instead of yourself. Now, did anyone notice how closely this definition of love that Paul gives here matches what I said at the front end of this message about what the world needs more of? Let me read the list again. What the world needs more of is unity, tolerance, acceptance, understanding, compassion, forgiveness, kindness, trust, hope, community, wisdom, contentment, and hugs. There's no mention of love in all of these characteristics that I just read you. But love brings people together. It makes them patient. It helps people to allow other people to be different without feeling like they have to condemn them or step on them. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs. This is what love actually is. And then there are two things that are missing from this list. And the first one is action. And love is always action, right? Love does. It engages. And it's also missing you and me. You know, when Jesus said, I want you to go out and love one another as I have loved you, he's not just talking about us and our little groups, where all the fans get around, and we give each other a group hug and kiss on the cheek before we go out for the day. He said, I want you to love other people as I've loved you. In other words, and at the very end, he said, I want you to go make disciples of all the nations. I want you to bring everybody into this circle of love. The people who are even most different from you, people you would never hang out on your own, as an act of love on their behalf. Jesus is quoted by John as saying, for God so loved, he gave. In this case, he gave his son. And he watched his son, Jesus, as we know him, step out of heaven, leave all of his powers as God behind, all of his rights as God behind, and come here, become a human being, just like everybody else, having to eat to stay alive and breathe to stay alive. And then he kept on going down to the worst, the bottom level that you could go to, and that is being crucified and humiliated on a cross. And he did that as an act of love. And when you see that in all of its power and beauty, the thought should be, I want to be just like him. And being like Jesus requires that we love. If Jesus is God, and he is, and if God is love, and he is, then loving will mean that just like God, we will serve. We will serve other people, and we will give and not hold on to everything. And I'll tell you, I've done a lot of funerals, probably hundreds if I go back over the years, and maybe even more than that. And here's what I know. The measure of a person's life is not what they have in the bank when they die. It's not what they hoard and keep into their home, And it's not, the sign on their office door that tells everybody how impressive they were. The measure of a person's life is what they give away. And our greatest temptation in life, is to cling to what we just can't hold on to and cling to. We just can't do it. I'm telling you, that's very different. You see people, and they've got like this white-knuckle grip on, their popularity, on their reputation, and on their money. And then some people, they kind of have a white-knuckle grip on their youth. They're just trying to hold on to it and cling to you before everything just kind of sinks down and heads toward the floor. But it's not about that. We were made in the image of God. And what that means is we step outside of that and we learn how to love and we learn how to give. And sometimes, we kind of get this backwards. Like we want God to give to us. Like, come on, bring it on, God, give me. Let me pay my bills, do all of this. And we want God to serve us. Come on, God, heal me, Help me with my exams. Help me with my housework. Help me to have a better attitude towards life. We want him to help us. And he wants us to call on him. But the thought is, we want him to help us. We want him to serve us. We want him to give to us. And yet love is best when it's mutual, when we give back. And we give back to him by serving other people. Jesus called them the least of these, the people who are hungry, the people who need a drink of water, the people who need somebody to visit them, the people who don't have a place to stay. That's what it means to give back. You cannot keep what you cling to. You cannot keep what you cling to. And I'll tell you what keeps us from that, and that's kind of this protective layer that surrounds our lives, and particularly our heart. And it looks a little bit like this, It's this self, and if you can, I don't know if you can see this or not, but the self and so on. And what happens is we try to keep our heart and keep our stuff and everything in this little container, this airtight container, so nothing can leak out. It's like we got this white knuckle grip on our stuff. And what happens in that casket, in that little casket, you can tell it's a casket by the handles on it, dies. It suffocates. See, we follow somebody who lived with his hands open. And sometimes what happens to us is we don't open up our hands really until we die, and then our hands are limp, and when finally the rigor mortis lessens up and so on, and our hands lessen up on the lift up on the sides of the bed we're dying in. We follow somebody who died with his hands nailed open, and that's how he lived, and that's how he calls us to live. See, you and I were made to change the world. And the way we change the world is by living as Jesus lived. In his book, Bob Goff talks about basically meeting a guy at a point in his life where he was truly introduced to love. He was in high school, and he talks about how he wasn't doing all that well in high school, but there was this guy that actually came to his high school, and he thought it was a little strange because this guy was obviously a lot older than all the other students. This guy's name was Randy. Well, he found out that, this Randy, and he had the things that Bob wanted. He had a girlfriend, he had a Triumph motorcycle, and he had a beard. And Bob didn't have any of those things. So he basically became friends with this guy. So he finally decided, he was in his junior year of high school, that is grade 11, and he decided he was just going to quit school because he wasn't doing well, and he wanted to do something more interesting. And he decides he's going to go off to Yosemite National Park, and he's going to work there and climb mountains in the evening and so on, or whenever he got off work. So he goes to Randy's door, pulls up in his VW Bug, and Randy comes to the door after he knocked several times. He's groggy, he's a serious case of bedhead, and Bob tells him his story. Tells him he's going to go to Yosemite and stuff and quit school. And Randy said, "Can you wait a few minutes?" So Randy disappears into the house, comes back about 5 minutes later, and he's got this old backpack and bedroll and so on. He says, "Do you mind if I go with you?" Bob said, sure, I guess so. And so anyways, he hopped into the VW Bug with Bob, and they went off. Beautiful place, Yosemite National Park. I don't know if you've ever seen any of the pictures or not. But so they get there, and they kind of hijack a tent and stay the night there. And then the next morning, Bob gets up, and he decides he's going to go out and find a job. So he goes to place after place after place, And Randy's one comment, whenever he would get rejected, and they would say, "No, we don't need anybody now. We won't need anybody for another year," and so on. Randy's comment was always, "Hey, Bob, I'm with you. I'm with you." So the second day, they're looking around like it's even more discouraging, and it becomes clear that there are no jobs to be had there. And Randy's encouraging him to go on. "Well, why don't you try over here? Why don't you try over here? You need to know I'm with you, man. I'm with you." Okay. So they finished off the day, and Randy sprang for supper, and they had supper, and they came out afterwards, and they're sitting out there in the evening air, leaning up against Bob's VW Bug, and it's pretty quiet. And finally, Bob says to Randy, he said, "It's clear that there are no jobs here." And he said, "And I don't have any more money," so he said, I think I'm just going to go back and finish high school. And Randy says, "Whatever, man, whatever it is that you want, I'm with you. I'm with you." So they got back in, and he said, they drove back, and it was a pretty quiet trip back. And they finally got to Randy's house, and they pulled in the driveway, and there's another car in the driveway. So Randy goes in, and Bob walks in with him, and so on. And he noticed it seems strange. There's dishes that are sitting out on the floor, and glasses, and so on, and wrapping paper, and he noticed that on the couch there's kind of this microwave that's halfway out of the carton, and so on. And then, the other half comes running out and says, "Randy, it's so good to have you back," and gives him a hug. And then the nickel dropped, and he realized that, Randy had gotten married on Saturday. He came to the door on Sunday morning, and Randy went off with him and spent with him the two most significant days that changed his life. Changed his life. And you think, wow, that's not natural to do that. What a sacrifice. And it was. But it changed this guy's life. And he's gone on since then, changing other people's lives. Small sacrifice. Big, big dividends. And I would have to say that that's exactly what loving and serving is. It's many times a sacrifice. It's not easy to do. It's not convenient. It sometimes requires what you don't seem to have. But the investment is massive. Multiplies beyond your wildest dreams. Maybe the best thing you ever do with your life. And see, what you have to realize is you want to do something with your life that matters. You've only got one. Make it count. Let's pray. I pray, God, that you will give us creative ways to show our love. It's what you've called us to do. It's the most important thing that you've ever called us to do. Help us to not walk into heaven with our hands empty. Help us to be able to invest in what really matters, what changes lives, and what changes eternity. Amen.
During Good News Give Back, we want to share stories and encourage you to commit to Jesus' movement of generosity and take action. It is our hope that everyone will get engaged and participate in at least one call to action, if not all three. And we hope that we have 100% participation. This week, our challenge is to love others. You can find the Love in Action card on the website, and on it is a list of suggestions of things that you can do to love others. For example, you can write a note of encouragement. Maybe it is to someone that you haven't connected with in a while, or maybe it's someone that God is pressing on your heart where they just need a little bit of encouragement, whether you know them well or not. Before you even move on to your next activity for the day, you can answer that call of action and take time to write that note. Whether you pause and write a note or not, we encourage you to choose one thing or create your own and do it this week. Choose who is going to receive that generous act of love and how you want to do it and who you want to do it with. Are you going to do it alone? Are you going to do it as a couple, as a family, getting your kids and teens involved? Is there a small group of friends you can do this with or your life group? Throughout this event, we also want to hear from you. What is your Good News Give Back story? How have you been impacted by the actions others have taken to love you, to serve you, to give to you? Or how have you been impacted by taking on a call to action and responding to one of these challenges? You can find that link on the website as well to share your story. During the next 2 Sundays, we will continue to learn together and be challenged on how we can impact our community and how we can be part of Jesus' movement of generosity. We would look forward to you joining us and meeting some of our community partners in person as we talk about what it means to give and to serve. We hope you have a great week and that you take up that challenge to love others generously.